Back in the old days, highway maintenance was a real gang operation. Or as a personnel specialist might say, it was a labor-intensive activity. What that means is most of the work was done with hand tools and lots of hands. Back then, when you talked horsepower, you meant horsepower, or maybe mule power. Well, luckily, things have changed a lot since then. Maintenance work has become equipment intensive. Heavy machinery has taken the place of the large road gangs. And when everything's working the way it's supposed to, you can get a lot more done in a lot less time. But when the equipment breaks down, the work comes to a stop, and you're back where you started, using your hands. The thing is, breakdowns can often be delayed or completely prevented if the operator spends just a few minutes each day looking over the equipment. Equipment problems usually don't just happen. Most of the time there are signs of trouble before it occurs. That's what preventive maintenance is all about, spotting trouble before it gets out of hand and taking the small but important steps to ensure a trouble-free day of operation. Equipment that's not out on the job working isn't worth very much. Downtime is expensive. The cost of new parts and labor for a major overhaul can easily exceed the price of a new car. But that's not all. You also have to put a value on the work that's not being done while the equipment is being repaired. So when you consider parts, plus labor, plus lost work, it really starts to add up. The department has put together a series of videotape programs on equipment operator training. The programs cover most of the major pieces of equipment we use to maintain our roads. Each program will include segments on preventive maintenance, the series of daily checks the operator should perform to make sure the equipment is in good shape. Now you might wonder, what does daily maintenance have to do with equipment operation? In a word, everything. You see, there's a world of difference between someone who can operate equipment and someone who can just drive it. An operator is someone who knows the equipment, not only how to use it, but also how to take care of it. That doesn't mean you have to be a mechanic. You just have to know what to look for. And you know most of that already. Let's say you were going to pack up your car and go on a cross-country trip. You'd want to make darn sure your car won't break down out in the middle of nowhere. The first thing you'd probably do is just walk around the car and look for obvious problems. Loose or broken parts, a puddle of water or oil under the car. Then you'd check your tires, look for uneven tread wear and cuts on the sidewalls. Keeping your tires at the recommended pressure makes them last longer, and it gives you more control when you're driving. You'd want to make sure all your lights are working: headlights, turn signals, and tail lights. Look for burned out bulbs or broken lenses. Then you'd probably check under the hood. Take a good look. Try to spot any leaks or broken parts. The first thing most people think of under the hood is the engine oil. Now, we all know that you can ruin the engine if you don't have enough oil, but contaminated oil can be just as bad. So if the oil's really dirty, schedule an oil change. Dirty air can ruin the engine too, and that makes air filters absolutely critical. Usually you can get most of the dust out of the air filter by tapping it lightly to shake it out. But if it's really clogged, it's probably time to get a new filter. While you have the filter off, you can check around the carburetor for leaky fuel lines and loose clamps. Make sure everything is nice and tight. The next check might be the coolant level. You'd want to make sure the level is at the full mark on the reservoir or about an inch from the top of the radiator. Low coolant leads to an overheated engine. Bad fan belts and hoses can also cause overheating. If they're loose, tighten them. If they're worn or cracked, get them replaced. A lot of people don't even think of their batteries. That is, until they can't get started on a cold morning. So make sure the battery is in good shape and fully charged. Keep the battery cables and terminals tight and free of corrosion. There are some more fluid levels you'd want to check, especially if you haven't checked them in a while. That would include your brake fluid, transmission fluid, and power steering fluid. If they aren't up to the right level, you're just asking for trouble. Okay, that about does it for engine checks. You're almost ready to go. But before you do, make sure you can see clearly all around. That means adjusting your mirrors and cleaning your windshield. A dirty windshield is both aggravating and dangerous. One more thing to check, the fuel. Fill it up soon unless you like walking. And before you leave, I hope you'd fasten your seatbelt. Nothing adds more to your safety than the few seconds it takes to buckle up. Now you can go, and you'll feel a lot more comfortable knowing the car's in good shape. But your checks shouldn't end as soon as you pull out of the driveway. In fact, they should continue throughout the day. While you drive, you need to pay attention to how well the car is running. Keep an eye on the gauges or warning lights. Look, listen, and feel for signs of trouble. If you notice anything unusual, pull off the road as soon as possible and investigate. Now, believe it or not, checking out your car before you go on a trip is a lot like checking out heavy equipment before a day's work. The whole idea is the same. Stop trouble before it stops you. The only real differences are the frequency and the number of the checks that you make. The programs you'll see in the training series will emphasize daily checks, and there are two good reasons why they are done daily. First, heavy equipment works in a tough environment. Rough terrain, dusty air, and heavy workloads put a strain on heavy equipment that would destroy a car in no time. Now the second reason. When you are assigned to a piece of equipment, you probably won't know if or when these checks have been made. Let's say your car has been leaking oil. You're aware of it because you use the car every day, but you'll often have no idea who has operated the equipment last. And if it breaks down while you're on it, you're the one who'll have to explain. So that's why you should look over the equipment every day. And for the most part, that's all you have to do. Look. If you find something wrong, fix it yourself, or let your supervisor or a mechanic know about it. Now for the number of checks. We'll use a front-end loader as an example. The checks you'd make on the loader are pretty much the same as those we've covered on the car. First, the walk-around. looking for obvious problems. Then engine checks, fluid levels, air filter, belts and hoses. And then the little things, cleaning the glass and checking the lights. During the day, you have running checks, watching the gauges, listening for unusual noises. And when trouble occurs, you stop working and investigate. Whenever you stop for a break, take a few minutes to look over the equipment. Try to spot problems before you get back to work. Don't get me wrong, there are some differences. Greasing, for example. Heavy equipment works hard, usually in a lot of dust. So it's necessary to do some greasing every day, but only the parts that get the most wear. You don't do a whole lube job every day. Another difference is hydraulics. On loaders, the hydraulic system controls the steering and the movements of the boom and bucket. Without hydraulics, the loader is just about useless. But all you really need to do to keep the hydraulic system working is make sure you've got enough hydraulic oil in the tank and check the hydraulic lines for leaks. It really is that simple. Check the level and look for leaks. There is one last difference I should mention. When you go to park the loader at the end of the day, you should let it idle a few minutes to cool down gradually. Shutting off a hot diesel engine immediately after working can damage it. And that's it. Except for a few things, preventive maintenance on a loader is about the same as checking out your car. You just have to do it more often. And you know, just like cars, heavy equipment will vary from one manufacturer to the next. So it's always a good idea to read the operator's manual before you get on any machine that's new to you. As I said earlier, you really can't separate preventive maintenance from equipment operation. To become a good operator, you have to know the equipment and be able to spot, report, and describe potential or obvious problems. So it all comes down to this. We keep the equipment in good shape, to keep the roads in good shape, to keep the traffic rolling.
You see dump trucks on virtually all highway maintenance projects. hauling tons of material to and from job sites. Towing equipment needed to get the job done, and keeping our highways open for travel and commerce during winter storms. Jobs like these require a big truck with a lot of power. And they require an operator with a lot of skill. Of course, watching these programs won't make you a skilled driver. Only experience will do that. But they will cover some points that will make you a better operator if you apply them consistently. Here in part 1 of this program on dump truck operation, we'll cover pre-trip inspections, the daily preventive maintenance you should do before you leave the yard. Then we'll cover startup procedures and some of the transmissions you'll be using as a dump truck driver. In part 2, we'll go over basic maneuvering, operating the dump box, and shutting down at the end of the day. Now, as you know, the department has a lot of trucks, old and new, different makes and models. And some procedures will vary from truck to truck. We'll concentrate on the tandem axle dump truck here. But for more detailed information on the truck you'll be using, read the operator's manual. Get to know any special operating instructions and the location and function of the various instruments and controls. Okay. Let's begin with pre-trip inspections. Follow the inspections outlined in the operator's daily checklist. Make a note of any problems you find and inform your supervisor of anything you can't fix yourself. The reason for making this check is simple. You don't want this to happen to you. Start with the engine compartment. Look for leaks or damages, anything that could cause problems out on the road. Check the engine oil every day. Keep the level between the full and add marks on the dipstick with the right type of oil. And note the condition of the oil. If it's thin or really dirty, schedule an oil change. If it's discolored, gritty, or smells of fuel, get the problem diagnosed and corrected. Check the air filter restriction indicator. If the filter is clogged, the indicator will show red at the bottom. That means the filter element should be cleaned or replaced. Next, check the coolant level. Make sure it's above the radiator core. And never check the coolant in a hot engine. Some radiators have a sight glass on the side, and if you can see coolant in the glass, you've got enough. Check the condition of the fan belts and hoses. Tighten any that are loose and replace any that are worn or cracked. Keep the battery clean. That'll discourage corrosion. Make sure the terminals are tight and in good shape. Check the battery water level once a month. Just remove the caps and make sure the water covers the baffles inside. Now, if the fuel filter on your truck has a petcock on it, drain a little fuel from the filter and check for signs of water or sediment. If you detect water in the fuel, drain a cup or so from the fuel tank. That should get rid of any water that is condensed in the tank. Then continue your inspections. Check your tires every day. Use a gauge if you think you've got low pressure. Underinflated tires wear out quickly and make the truck harder to control. Some operators check inflation by thumping each tire with a hammer. Underinflated tires will have a duller sound and there will be less rebound when you hit them. Look for deep cuts on the tread and sidewalls, and check for loose or broken lug nuts. There are still a few more checks to make yet, but they should be done after startup, which we'll cover now. First, make sure the parking brake is set and the transmission is in neutral. Then depress the clutch pedal and turn the key to start the engine. Don't crank the starter for more than 30 seconds. If the engine doesn't start, wait a couple of minutes, then try again. Once you get it started, let the engine idle for 5 minutes. This warm-up period is important to establish an oil film on the internal engine parts. And it gives you time to complete your daily checks. Check the gauges. You should get an oil pressure reading right away. If the gauge reads 0 or low pressure, shut the engine down. It might be a bad oil filter or pump. Check the air pressure gauge. A warning light and buzzer will stay on until the pressure in the air brake system reaches about 60 pounds. And that's enough to move the truck slowly in the yard. But to be absolutely safe, wait until the pressure gets up around 90 to 120 pounds before you take the truck out on the road. Make sure the battery is charging. And the temperature gauge is working. And of course, check your fuel. Make sure your lights are working. Headlights, flashers, and beacon. Ask someone to check your turn signals, brake lights, and backup lights. Make sure your backup alarm is working. And check your windshield wipers and horn. And make sure your fire extinguisher is charged, secure, and accessible. Sign the inspection card every month. Check the free play in the clutch pedal. If you have more or less than 1.5 inches of free travel, it's time for an adjustment. If you'll be using the dump box during the day, now's a good time to check that too. We'll go over the procedure for raising the dump box later on in Part 2. Whenever you have to get under a raised dump box, block it with the safety props or with a sturdy block of wood so it can't come down on you. And never get under a loaded box under any circumstances. Then get out the grease gun and lubricate the fittings around the pivot points. Check for damage or leaks around the hydraulic ram, cylinder, and lines. After greasing, remove the safety props and get ready to go. Lower the box all the way down. Fasten your seatbelt. Nothing adds more to your safety than the few seconds it takes to buckle up. Adjust both of your rear view mirrors for maximum visibility. Test the brakes a couple of times before you leave the yard. Make sure there's no pulling to either side. As you can see, the daily inspection routine doesn't end after you start the engine. In fact, it continues throughout the day. Keep an eye on the gauges. Look, listen, and feel for signs of trouble. Inspect your vehicle for damage occasionally throughout the day. Get to know your truck so you'll be able to spot, report, and describe potential problems. Now let's take a look at the types of transmissions you'll use as a dump truck driver. Besides a healthy concern for safety, knowing how to use the transmission properly is about the most important skill a truck driver can have, and it's probably the hardest to learn. We'll start with automatic transmissions. Automatic transmissions in trucks are very similar to those in cars. They just have more drive positions or ranges. You'll use the highest drive positions most often. In this position, the truck starts out in second gear and shifts automatically through the higher gears. It's for normal driving at highway speeds. The middle positions are helpful in low-speed, stop-and-go operations, like plowing snow, where you need more traction than speed. The lowest drive position isn't used very often, only when you're off the road and there's a chance of getting stuck. Always stop the truck completely before you shift into or out of low gear. Okay, that seems simple enough, but operating a manual transmission is a bit trickier. And no wonder. Some of the manual transmissions are 5-speed, 10-speed, and 13-speed, plus more gears in reverse. Then there's high range, low range, direct drive, underdrive, and overdrive. It all gets a little confusing. We'll use a 10-speed transmission to show you the procedure here. But learning to shift a manual transmission takes time and practice. Be sure to read the operator's manual for instructions on shifting gears in the truck you'll be using. Before we get started, let's cover some basic points. The shift pattern for your truck will be on a decal somewhere in the cab. Learn the position for each gear. Each gear has a governed speed. That's the maximum revolutions per minute, or RPM, the engine can reach in any one gear. Running the engine over the governed speed could damage it. Use the tachometer to help you keep track of the RPM. Don't let the engine run too fast or too slow for the gear you're using. Okay, let's look at the 10-speed transmission. This diagram shows the shifting pattern. There are really only 5 positions for the 10 gears, but there are 2 ranges for each position, low and high. You select the range with this knob on the gear shift. Pushed in, you're in the low range. Pulled out, you're in the high range. Let's see how it works. Start out in a gear that lets you get rolling without slipping the clutch. If the dump box is empty and you're on a good road, you can probably start out in second gear in the low range. Notice how quickly this driver upshifts from one gear to the next. That's progressive shifting. Shifting into a higher gear before the engine reaches governed speed. That saves fuel and creates less noise. After you go through the first 5 gears, pull the range selector out and repeat the shift pattern. Now you're in high range. Watch the tachometer and listen to the engine. Again, don't let the engine run too fast or too slow for the gear you're using. As your speed decreases and the RPMs fall, downshift to the next lower gear. To downshift from 6th gear to 5th, simply push the range selector in for low range and shift into 5th. Downshifting saves a lot of wear on the brakes because it lets the engine help slow the truck. As I said, it's going to take some practice. The load you're carrying, the driving conditions, the sound of the engine, and the tachometer will influence which gear you choose. But with experience, you'll begin to select the correct gear almost instinctively. The only hard and fast rules are these. Always start and park the truck in low range. Never shift ranges while moving in reverse. Stop the truck first, then shift. And finally, don't ride the clutch. Resting your foot on the clutch pedal will wear it out and could possibly damage the engine. Okay, here's something that may be new to you, the differential lock or power divider. It's not really part of the transmission, but it may help you get out of some tough situations. On tandem dump trucks, both rear axles drive independently to power the truck. But if you get into an area where there's a good chance of getting stuck, let up on the accelerator and engage the differential lock. That gets both rear axles pulling together for better traction. Disengage it when you get out of trouble. But remember, never engage the differential lock when your wheels are spinning. That could damage it, the drive shaft, or the rear axles. Okay, that's it for part 1. Pre-trip inspections, startup procedures, and transmissions. In part 2, we'll get out on the road and cover basic maneuvering, operating the dump box, and shutting down at the end of the day. Here in part 2 of dump truck operation, we'll cover basic maneuvering, operating the dump box, and shutting down the truck at the end of the day. First, maneuvering. When you get right down to it, driving a dump truck isn't much different than driving your car. The main difference is size. The truck's a lot bigger and heavier. And that means you've got to be extra careful when you stop, turn, and back your truck. A loaded truck can weigh over 15 tons, and once it gets rolling, it needs a lot more time and distance to slow down and stop. So for safe braking, don't move the truck until the air pressure in the air brake system reaches 60 pounds of pressure, and the air pressure warning light and buzzer have turned off. Even then, you should wait till the pressure's between 90 and 100 pounds or so before you leave the yard. And make sure your brake lights are working. That'll help prevent accidents. Always fasten your seatbelt before you head out. And test your brakes in the yard before you get moving too fast. Out on the road, you've got to be alert. Anticipate the movements of other vehicles. Slow down as you approach intersections. Remember, you need more room to stop. Use the transmission to help you slow down by downshifting. Maintain a good, safe following distance. Remember, there are no excuses for a rear-end collision. And perhaps most important, always travel at a speed which is consistent with the road, traffic, and weather conditions. So, for safe braking, check the air pressure. Check your brake lights. Test your brakes. Anticipate the need to slow down. Downshift to help you slow the vehicle. Maintain a safe following distance. And travel at a speed which is consistent with the conditions. Now turning. Keeping your tires at the right pressure makes it easier to control your truck. Check them every day. When you're making a right turn, don't drift out into the opposing lane before you make the turn. Someone could try to sneak through on the right side. And don't cut a right turn so sharp that you run into signs or over curbs. That's sloppy driving, and it's usually unnecessary. Here's the right way to make a right turn. Signal well in advance, slow down to a safe turning speed, and stay in your lane as you go through the turn. Now, there will be times when you can't avoid crossing the center line. But do it on the road you're turning onto, not the road you're turning from. That way, at least you are facing possible danger and can deal with it. Okay, now left turns. What could go wrong here? Well, again, you could cut the turn too soon or too sharp. But instead of hitting a curb or sign, you could take off the fender of that vehicle waiting at the intersection. So make your left turns a little wider. Get out into the middle of the intersection before you turn. Then make your turn smoothly and without obstructing traffic. When you approach a tight curve in the road, slow down before you enter the curve, downshift if necessary, and speed up slowly as you pass the midpoint of the curve. Okay, let's review turning. Make steering easier. Check your tires every day. Signal well in advance of your turn. Slow down to a safe turning speed. And stay in your lane as you go through the turn. And if you have to cross the center line, do it on the crossroad. Now let's take a look at backing the truck. Backing up is the most dangerous basic driving maneuver. In fact, avoid it whenever possible. So instead of backing onto this road, for example, turn that thing around and enter traffic correctly. Of course, you'll have to back up occasionally throughout the day. So here are a few things to keep in mind. There's a large blind spot directly behind the truck, a cone of danger. No, that's not it, but we can use traffic cones to give you an idea of the size of the area. As you can see, the cone of danger is large enough to conceal personnel, equipment, or another vehicle from the driver's vision. So to be safe, check your mirrors. And if you're not absolutely sure what's behind you, get out of the cab and look behind the truck. Remember, the driver is responsible for any backing accidents. Pick out some reference points that you can back toward, and keep them in sight of your rear view mirrors. Or even better, ask someone to spot for you and follow their directions as you back up. Use your mirrors. Don't lean out of the cab. That's a good way to lose control of your truck. And always back up at a safe, slow speed so you'll be able to stop quickly if you have to. So for backing, remember, back up only when you have to. If you can drive around the block to avoid backing up, do that. Before backing, check behind you. And use reference points or a spotter to guide you. Use your mirrors. Don't lean out of the cab. And back up at a safe, slow speed. One more point about mirrors, they do distort distance, especially the convex or spot mirrors. Objects may appear farther away than they really are. But your mirrors are still the only way you can check behind you without getting out of the cab, not only when you're backing up, but also when you're out on the road. Keep an eye on vehicles approaching from the rear. You have to know if anyone is getting into that blind spot before they get there. Okay, now for the dump truck's most important feature, the dump box. To operate the dump box, you'll have to master 3 simple controls: the tailgate latch, the power takeoff or PTO, and the dump hoist control. Here's the procedure for trucks with manual transmissions. First, position your truck at the dump site. If you're dumping into a stockpile, don't back too far into the pile. The mud flaps could get stuck and rip off when you pull away. Put the transmission in neutral and set the parking brake. Then trip the tailgate latch. To raise the box, depress the clutch and engage the PTO. The PTO takes power off the transmission and uses it to raise the box. Move the hoist control to the raise position and accelerate the engine slightly. You don't have to floor it, just enough to get the box rising smoothly. When the material slides out of the box, put the truck in gear, release the brake, and pull ahead a few feet to clear the pile. Then put the transmission back in neutral again and reset the parking brake. To lower the box, move the hoist control to the lower position, depress the clutch, and disengage the PTO. When the box is all of the way down, relatch the tailgate and inspect the rear of the truck for damage. Brush off any loose material that could fly off and break someone's windshield. Let's go over it one more time. First, position your truck. Put the transmission in neutral and set the parking brake. Then trip the tailgate latch. Engage the PTO and move the hoist control to the raise position. Accelerate the engine slightly to get the box rising smoothly. When the material slides out of the box, drive ahead a few feet to clear the pile and bring the box down. And don't forget to relatch the tailgate. If the tailgate doesn't latch, check to see if the tailgate chains are keeping it from closing. Be careful not to insert your fingers beneath the tailgate. They could be crushed. Now let's take a look at using the box on a truck with an automatic transmission. First, put your foot firmly on the brake pedal and shift into any drive gear. Engage the PTO and shift back into neutral. Move the hoist control to the raise position. And speed up the engine slightly to raise the box. To lower the box, disengage the PTO and move the hoist control to the lower position. The box will come down under its own weight. Some trucks have a front-mounted pump which drives the hydraulic system. On these models, you have to shut off the engine in order to engage the PTO. From then on, the procedure is about the same as we've seen. The only difference is that on trucks with a front-mounted pump, you can leave the PTO engaged all day. On all other trucks, however, you should disengage the PTO after you dump the material. Now a few more points about dumping. Always position your truck so that it is as level as possible. If you raise the box on a slope, you could roll the whole truck. And if you're dumping in an area with tree limbs or power lines overhead, make sure you or your spotter check the clearance. Finally, avoid driving with the box in the raised position. After you dump the load, bring the box all the way down. Okay, that's single pile dumping. But you'll also use your truck to spread material. The procedure for spreading is nearly the same as in single pile dumping. You use the same controls. But in spreading, you regulate the flow of material by adjusting the tailgate spreader chains to control the size of the tailgate opening. Here's how it's done. Position the truck at the dump site. Then adjust the spreader chains to get the right tailgate opening for the job. If you want a thicker spread, you'll need a wider tailgate opening. Then raise the box and drive ahead slowly. Trip the tailgate latch so the material slides out and spreads out evenly behind the truck. Then bring the box down. Set the brake and put the transmission in neutral. Relatch the tailgate and inspect the rear of the truck for damage, especially broken lights. Brush off any loose material. Then head back for another load. When you get back to the loading site, position your truck so the loader can go from the stockpile to the truck easily and quickly. Look for tire tracks of the other trucks. That's probably where the loader operator wants you. There are two safe places to be while your truck's being loaded, either in the cab or well away from the truck and loader. Don't let the loader operator overfill the box. Steering a dump truck is hard enough without carrying a lot of extra weight. And besides, driving an overloaded truck is against the law, and the truck driver is responsible for any fines or penalties. The weight of the load should not exceed the legal limit for your truck. And the height of the load should not exceed the sides of the box. If it does, have the loader operator strike off the excess with the loader bucket, or get out your shovel and level the load yourself. After you've dumped your last load, it's time to shut down. Try to keep your truck clean. Wash out the box at the end of the day. Clean equipment works better and lasts longer. Then park your truck on level ground. Back into the parking area when possible. Put the transmission in neutral and set the parking brake. Let the engine idle for 5 minutes. In the meantime, complete your daily checks. If you have air brakes on your truck, bleed some air out of the air tanks. That will get rid of any moisture that's built up during the day. Do a quick walk-around inspection. Look for any damage that may have occurred throughout the day. Like this gash in the tire. If your truck has an automatic transmission, check the transmission fluid level at least once a week while the engine's running. Shut down the engine after it's cooled down. Put the transmission in first or reverse. On automatics, leave it in neutral and double check the parking brake. And if there's any doubt about the vehicle staying put, block the wheels. Check the power steering fluid when the engine's still warm. And remember, don't overfill any fluid level. In most cases, adding too much is as bad as not enough. Make a note of any problems or damage and report them to your supervisor. As I said in the beginning of this program, you won't learn how to drive a truck from watching a TV show. But try to remember the points we've covered here and apply them as you gain more experience. That, along with plenty of practice, will earn you a reputation as a skilled and responsible operator.